The Arizona sun bore down on the cracked asphalt of East Van Buren Street like the hand of an angry god. Heat shimmered off the pavement in waves, turning the afternoon into a blurred watercolor of desperation. Inside the 10-year-old Honda Civic, Marlo Tennyson gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles had gone bone white. The air conditioning had died 2 summers ago, and sweat plastered her dark blonde hair to her forehead, running in rivulets down her neck, soaking into the collar of her nursing scrubs. But it wasn't the heat that made her heart hammer against her ribs like a caged bird trying to break free. It was the empty booster seat in the rearview mirror. Beckett should have been there. Her 7-year-old son should have been chattering about his day at Desert Springs Elementary, showing her the picture he'd drawn in art class, asking if they could stop for ice cream at the corner shop near their apartment. He should have been there, buckled in safe, his gap-toothed smile lighting up her world the way it had every single day since he was born. Instead, the seat sat vacant, a cruel reminder that 3 hours ago her entire world had shattered into 1,000 pieces of broken glass. Marlo's phone buzzed in the cup holder for the 14th time. She didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. Sterling Caldwell, her husband of 8 months. The man the Phoenix Business Journal had featured just last month as one of the city's rising stars in commercial real estate. The man whose smile had charmed her at a hospital fundraiser 2 years ago, who'd promised to give her and Beck the stable life they deserved after 4 years of struggling alone. The man who had just destroyed everything. His voicemail from 11:47 that morning still echoed in her mind, each word a knife twisting deeper into her gut. The smooth, controlled voice. The voice of a man who believed he held all the cards. Marlo, don't do anything stupid. Beck is with me. He's safe. But if you call the police, if you tell anyone about what you found, you'll never see him again. I know people, Marlo, people who can make you disappear. Think about what's best for your son. Her hands shook harder on the wheel. What she'd found. The locked drawer in Sterling's home office that she'd opened with a bobby pin that morning, driven by weeks of growing suspicion. Months of noticing things that didn't quite add up. The late-night phone calls he took in another room. The business trips that lasted too long. The way his eyes would go cold and empty when he thought she wasn't looking. She'd found the truth in that drawer, and the truth was a nightmare beyond anything she could have imagined. Photographs, documents, names, dates, transactions that painted a picture so dark she'd vomited in the bathroom sink. Sterling Caldwell wasn't just a successful businessman. He was a predator who'd built his empire on the broken bodies and shattered lives of the innocent. His legitimate real estate company was nothing more than a front for a trafficking operation that stretched from Phoenix to Tijuana, from Los Angeles to Houston. And now he had her son. Marlo pulled into the cracked parking lot of a gas station, her vision blurring with tears she'd been holding back for 3 hours. She couldn't break down. Not yet. Not when Beck needed her to be strong. But God, it hurt. It hurt like nothing she'd ever felt, not even when the fire chief had knocked on her door 4 years ago to tell her that her husband wouldn't be coming home. That firefighter, Daniel Tennyson, had died saving a family of 5 from a burning apartment building. Daniel had been a hero. He died doing what was right. And now their son was in the hands of a monster. Marlo reached for her phone with trembling fingers. She'd already tried calling the police at noon right after Sterling's voicemail. The dispatcher had been polite but dismissive. A domestic custody dispute, they'd said. The boy was with his stepfather. There was no evidence of immediate danger. They'd send an officer to take a report, but these things took time. Did she have a custody agreement? Had there been prior incidents? She'd hung up, her stomach dropping. They didn't understand, couldn't understand. Sterling had connections throughout the Phoenix Police Department. She'd heard him on the phone laughing with someone he called the deputy chief, talking about golf games and charity dinners and mutual friends in high places. If she went through official channels, Sterling would know, and Beck would disappear. At 12:30, she called the law firm that had handled her husband's estate. The receptionist had taken her information, promised someone would call back. At 1:15, a junior associate had returned her call, very sorry for her situation. Unfortunately, Mr. Caldwell had retained Mitchell Barnes and Associates, the top family law firm in Phoenix. Any custody battle would be lengthy and expensive. Did she have funds for a retainer? She'd hung up again, the walls closing in. Sterling had thought of everything. He'd built his trap carefully, methodically. He'd swept into her life when she was vulnerable and alone, struggling to raise Beck on a nurse's salary, working double shifts just to make rent. He'd been charming, successful, stable. Everything she thought she needed. Everything she thought would give Beck the father figure he deserved. She'd been so blind. The memory hit her like a physical blow. Beck at age 5 tugging on her sleeve one night after Sterling had left following dinner. Those wide brown eyes looking up at her with a wisdom no 5-year-old should possess. "He's scary, Mama." "What do you mean baby Sterling's been so nice to us?" "His smile doesn't reach his eyes. Teacher says when people smile for real, their eyes smile too. His don't." She dismissed it, told Beck that Sterling was just shy, still getting to know them, that sometimes adults smile different than kids. She'd rationalized away her son's instincts because she'd wanted so badly to believe in the fairy tale, to believe that she could give Beck a complete family again, that they could stop struggling, stop worrying about every dollar, stop feeling like they were drowning. She'd traded her son's safety for the illusion of security. The gas station bathroom mirror showed her a stranger, 32 years old but looking 50. Mascara smudged under red-rimmed eyes, hair a mess, still wearing the scrubs from her morning shift at Phoenix General, the shift she'd left early after finding Sterling's drawer. The shift where her colleagues had asked if she was feeling okay because she looked pale. She'd lied, said she had a headache, needed to go home, if only they knew. Marlo splashed cold water on her face, trying to think, trying to find a way through this impossible situation. Sterling had money, connections, power. He had lawyers and politicians and police officers in his pocket. He had a public image as a respected businessman, a philanthropist, a pillar of the community. What did she have? A nurse's salary, no family in Arizona, a handful of friends from work who couldn't possibly understand the nightmare she was living. She had nothing. She was nothing, just another single mother who'd made the mistake of trusting the wrong man. The thought made her angry, a spark of rage igniting in the hollow place where hope used to live. No, she wasn't nothing. She was Beck's mother, and a mother's love was the most powerful force in the universe. It had carried her through Daniel's death, through 4 years of grief and struggle, and learning to be both mother and father to a little boy who needed her. Through endless night shifts and scraped together meals and clothes from thrift stores, she'd survived all of that. She could survive this. But how Marlo leaned against the bathroom sink, her mind racing. The police couldn't help. Lawyers couldn't help. The system that was supposed to protect people like her and Beck was rigged in favor of people like Sterling, men with money and influence and the ability to make problems disappear. She needed help from outside the system, from people who didn't care about Sterling's connections or his lawyers or his carefully constructed public image. The memory surfaced slowly like something rising from deep water. 6 months ago, late shift in the ER. Her colleague Bryn had come in to pick up her paycheck looking 10 years younger than she had in weeks, smiling for the first time since her daughter disappeared. "They found her," Bryn had said, tears streaming down her face. "She's coming home." Marlo had hugged her relief flooding through her. Bryn's 16-year-old daughter had run away 3 weeks earlier with a boyfriend twice her age, a known drug dealer with a history of violence. The police had taken a report, told Bryn these things happen. Teenage girls made bad choices. They'd keep an eye out. 3 weeks of nothing. 3 weeks of Bryn dying inside, imagining the worst. "How?" Marlo had asked. "How did you find her?" Bryn had hesitated, then quietly, "The Hells Angels." Marlo had stared at her. "The motorcycle gang. They're not a gang, they're a club, a brotherhood." Bryn's voice had been fierce defensive. "My neighbor knew someone. I was desperate. I went to their clubhouse and I begged for help. And they helped. No questions, no payment. They found my baby in 48 hours and brought her home safe. The police did nothing for 3 weeks. These men did everything in 2 days." Marlo had nodded, uncomfortable with the conversation. Her mother had raised her to fear people like that. Bikers, men with leather vests and tattoos and loud motorcycles. Men who looked dangerous. Men who, according to every news report and every social warning, were criminals and outlaws and threats to decent society. "I know what people think," Bryn had continued as if reading Marlo's mind. "I thought the same thing. But they saved my daughter. They're better men than most of the respectable people in this city." Marlo had murmured something polite and changed the subject. filed the story away as an interesting anecdote, something that happened to other people in desperate situations, never imagining that 6 months later, she would be the desperate one. Now standing in a gas station bathroom, that conversation came rushing back with the force of a revelation. The Hells Angels. People society told you to fear. People who operated outside the system. People who didn't care about Sterling's money or connections. People who helped when no one else would. Marlowe's hand stopped shaking. Her breathing steadied. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw something different than the broken woman from moments before. She saw a mother who would do whatever it took to save her child, even if it meant walking into a world she'd been taught to fear. She pulled out her phone and searched. Vera's Roadhouse, West Jefferson Street. The name came up in connection with the Phoenix chapter of the Hells Angels. Reviews were sparse. Not for tourists, one said. Real biker bar, said another. Don't go unless you know someone. Marlowe didn't know anyone, but she was going anyway. It was 2:15 in the afternoon when she pulled up outside Vera's Roadhouse. The building looked like it hadn't seen renovations since the 1970s. Faded paint, cracked windows, a neon open sign that flickered intermittently. 3 motorcycles sat parked out front, massive Harley-Davidsons that gleamed despite their age. Each one bore the distinctive death head logo that made Marlowe's stomach clench with fear and desperate hope. She sat in her car for 5 minutes trying to find the courage to walk through that door. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. All the warnings from childhood. Stay away from those people. Cross the street if you see them. They're dangerous. They're criminals. They'll hurt you. But Sterling had hurt her worse than anyone ever had. Sterling with his tailored wardrobe and his charity dinners and his place on the Phoenix Business Journal's Rising Stars list. Sterling who looked like everything respectable and safe and good. Appearances lied. Marlowe got out of the car. Her legs felt like water, but she forced them to carry her forward. Across the parking lot, up the 2 concrete steps, her hand on the door handle. She thought of Beck, his smile, his laugh. The way he'd hug her so tight when she picked him up from school, like he'd been waiting all day just for that moment. The way he'd tell her about dinosaurs, his absolute favorite thing in the world, rattling off names she couldn't pronounce, and facts that amazed her. The way he'd sounded on Sterling's phone, small, scared, crying for his mama. Marlowe opened the door and stepped inside. The bar's interior was darker than the street outside. It took her eyes several seconds to adjust. The smell hit her first stale beer and old cigarette smoke that clung to everything despite Phoenix's no-smoking ordinances. A jukebox in the corner played Johnny Cash. 4 men sat at the bar, their broad backs to her leather vests decorated with patches and pins that told stories Marlowe couldn't read. She stood just inside the door, frozen. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get back in her car and find another way. Any other way. But there was no other way. This was it. This was the only chance Beck had. The bartender looked up from polishing a glass. A woman in her 60s with steel gray hair, pulled back in a ponytail, and arms covered in faded tattoos. Her eyes swept over Marlowe, taking in the hospital scrubs, the mascara smudged under red eyes, the way she clutched her purse like a lifeline. You lost, sweetheart. The woman's voice wasn't unkind, but it was cautious, assessing. Marlowe's voice came out smaller than she wanted. I need to speak to Flint Blackwood. The bar went silent. Even Johnny Cash seemed to fade into the background. One of the men at the bar turned slowly on his stool. A mountain of a man with long brown hair, pulled back in a ponytail, a beard that reached his chest and arms, decorated with intricate tattoos that disappeared under the sleeves of his black t-shirt. His eyes were sharp, assessing the color of storm clouds before rain. He studied her for a long moment. Marlowe felt like he could see right through her, reading every fear and hope and desperate prayer written on her soul. When he spoke, his voice was surprisingly gentle, at odds with his intimidating appearance. I'm Flint Blackwood. What's wrong with your son? The question broke something inside her. The careful control she'd been maintaining for 3 hours shattered like glass. The words tumbled out in a rush, tripping over each other in their desperate need to be heard. His name is Beckett. He's 7 years old and he loves dinosaurs, and he can name every single species, and he's the sweetest, kindest little boy and my husband. My stepfather, Sterling, Caldwell took him from school this morning, and he called me and he said, if I call the police, I'll never see Beck again. And I found these documents, these horrible documents about trafficking, and I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. The police won't help, and the lawyers won't help. And I know what people say about you. I know I shouldn't be here, but I also know that you helped my colleague find her daughter when nobody else would, and I don't have anyone else to turn to, and Sterling took my baby, and I need help getting him back. She ran out of breath, out of words. She stood there, shaking, tears streaming down her face, her whole body trembling with fear and grief and the terrible vulnerability of laying her desperation bare before strangers. Flint Blackwood stood. Marlowe realized he was even taller than she thought, at least 6'4", with a presence that commanded the room. But when he spoke, his voice remained calm, almost soothing. Sit down. He pulled out a stool. Tell me everything about Sterling Caldwell. Everything you know, everything you found, and then we're going to get your son back. The red-haired man next to Flint, his vest marking him as Reaper, the vice president, leaned forward. You sure about this, brother, getting involved in a domestic situation? Flint's expression hardened. There's nothing domestic about trafficking and kidnapping a kid. He looked back at Marlowe. You heard what she said. This goes way beyond a custody dispute. Marlowe pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She'd taken photos that morning before fleeing the house. Photos of Sterling's documents, spreadsheets with coded transactions, photographs of shipping containers, names and routes that painted a damning picture of an operation that spanned multiple states and countries. Flint scrolled through the images, his jaw tightening with each swipe. The other men gathered around, their faces growing darker as they saw what Sterling Caldwell really was beneath his polished exterior. How long have you been married to this piece of garbage? Reaper asked, his voice rough with anger. 8 months. Marlowe's voice broke. We dated for 6 months before that. I thought I was giving Beck a father. A good man. Sterling was so charming, so successful. He treated us like we were precious. I never suspected. That's how predators work. Flint's voice was quiet but filled with something painful. They're good at wearing masks, real good. My daughter. He paused, something flickering across his weathered face. Old grief carefully controlled. I've seen it before. People who look perfect on the outside, rotten on the inside. And people like you and me, we're taught to trust respectability, to be afraid of those who look different. Sometimes the world's got it exactly backward. He pulled out his own phone and made a call. Reaper, get word out to all the Phoenix Charter members. I want every brother and sister on alert. We're looking for a 7-year-old boy, brown hair, brown eyes, last seen wearing a blue t-shirt with the dinosaur on it, kidnapped by his stepfather, Sterling Caldwell. His voice hardened. Yeah, that Caldwell, the real estate guy. This goes out priority 1. As Flint spoke, Marlowe felt something she hadn't felt since that morning. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope of a drowning person, but something solid. Real. These men, these people society had taught her to fear, were mobilizing to help her son without hesitation, without asking for payment, without questioning whether they should get involved. The bartender, who'd introduced herself as Vera, brought Marlowe a glass of water and a sandwich she hadn't ordered. Eat something, honey. You're going to need your strength. Within 30 minutes, the bar had started to fill with bikers. Men and women in leather vests ranging from their 20s to their 70s, each bearing the death head patch that marked them as hellsangels. They listened as Flint briefed them on the situation, showing them Sterling's photo, from Marlowe's phone describing Beck, outlining what they knew about Sterling's operations. This boy is 7 years old at Buen. Flint's voice carried an authority that demanded attention. His mother came to us because she had nowhere else to turn, because she knew we'd help when the system failed her. That's who we are. That's what we do. We protect people who can't protect themselves. We stand up when others turn away. And we're going to find Beck Tennyson and bring him home safe. A massive man with gray beard raised his hand. What about Caldwell's properties guy? Like that, he's got to have multiple locations. Maybe a warehouse somewhere off the books. Good thinking, Knox. Flint turned to Marlowe. You know if Sterling has any properties that aren't publicly listed? Anywhere he might take Beck. Marlowe's mind raced through months of overheard phone calls and cryptic comments. There's a property north of the city, near Cave Creek. He told me it was an investment property. Said it wasn't ready for visitors yet. He was always secretive about it. Never let me come along when he went there. I thought it was just business, but that's where we start. Flint looked around the room at the assembled bikers. I want teams of 4 checking every property associated with Caldwell or his company. Knox, you take the Cave Creek location with your crew. Reaper coordinate with the other Arizona charters. We need eyes everywhere. Vera, you're our communication hub. Anyone finds anything, it goes through you to me immediately. A younger woman with bright blue eyes and blonde hair twisted into a braid stepped forward. Luna Marlowe would learn her name was. What about the cops, Flint? This guy's got connections, but we should at least try to go through proper channels. I know someone. Flint's voice was careful. Detective Quinn Hartley. She's straight, doesn't play politics. Let me make a call, see if we can get her on board without tipping off anyone on Caldwell's payroll. As the bikers began filing out, each stopping to offer Marlowe a word of encouragement or a gentle touch on her shoulder, she felt overwhelmed. These people, these supposedly dangerous criminals, were showing her more humanity than anyone in her respectable social circle ever had. Sterling's country club friends, the couples they'd socialize with at charity galas, the neighbors in their upscale subdivision, none of them would have mobilized like this. None of them would have dropped everything to help a desperate mother. Flint sat down next to her as the bar emptied. We're going to find him, Marlowe, I promise you that. Why? The question burst out of her. Why are you helping me? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Flint was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. When he spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. I had a daughter. Her name was Lily. She was 8 when a drunk driver ran a red light and killed her and her mother. He paused, his hands clenching into fists. The driver was some hotshot lawyer's son, connected family, the kind of people who think they're untouchable. He got 6 months in county jail, served 3. The system protected him because he came from the right family, had the right connections, went to the right schools. He looked at Marlowe and she saw decades of grief and rage tempered into something harder, something purposeful. I learned something that day. The world doesn't divide into good people and bad people based on appearances or wealth or social standing. It divides into people who protect the innocent and people who don't. You're Sterling Caldwell. He's got the whole city fooled with his charm and his donations and his business awards. But you and I, we see what he really is. And I'll be damned if I let another child suffer because society was too busy judging by appearances to do what's right. Marlowe reached out and squeezed Flint's hand, her eyes filling with tears. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Flint stood. Thank me when Beck's back in your arms. Now I need you to write down everything you can remember about that Cave Creek property. How to get there, what the place looks like, any security measures Sterling mentioned. Every detail matters. As Marlowe began writing, her phone buzzed. Sterling. This time she answered, putting it on speaker so Flint could hear. Sterling's voice was smooth, controlled, the voice of a man who believed he held all the cards. Marlowe, have you thought about my offer? Sign the papers. Keep your mouth shut, and you can have Beck's back. Fight me, and you'll regret it. Where is he? Marlowe's voice was steadier than she felt. Let me talk to him. I need to know he's okay. There was a pause. Then Beck's small voice came through the line, and Marlowe's heart shattered all over again. Mom, I'm scared. I want to come home. Beck, baby, I'm coming for you, I promise. The line went dead. Marlowe stared at the phone, her hands shaking. But when she looked up at Flint, she saw something that steadied her. Determination, purpose, the absolute certainty that this man would move heaven and earth to bring it back home. Let's go get your boy, Flint said. The word spread through the Phoenix charter like wildfire. Brothers and sisters who'd been at work left early. Those who'd been sleeping got calls that brought them out of bed. Within 2 hours, 50 Hells Angels had gathered at Vera's Roadhouse. Within 4 hours, 100. By evening, word had reached the other Arizona charters. Tucson, Flagstaff, Yuma, Prescott, Sedona. Marlowe watched in amazement as the parking lot filled with motorcycles. Harleys of every model and year, each one lovingly maintained, each bearing the death head patch. The riders ranged from their early 20s to their 70s, men and women, veterans and civilians. But all united by something Marlowe was beginning to understand wasn't about rebellion or lawlessness. It was about honor, about standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves, about being the kind of people who acted when action was needed, not when it was convenient or profitable or socially acceptable. Luna sat with Marlowe as the sun began to set, bringing a momentary relief from the desert heat. "I used to be a social worker," Luna said quietly. "Worked in the system for 10 years. Saw so many kids fall through the cracks because the system was designed to protect itself, not them. The Hells Angels do what the system can't or won't. We're not perfect, but we're real." Ghost, the oldest member at 73, came over with a cup of coffee for Marlowe, his weathered face creased with kindness. "Been riding with this club for 45 years, daughter. Korean War veteran. Seen the best and worst humanity has to offer. Can tell you this, honor isn't found in boardrooms or country clubs. It's found in people willing to put themselves on the line for strangers, for what's right. Your boy's going to come home safe. You have my word on that." By 9 that evening, 500 Hells Angels had gathered. Vera's parking lot overflowed into the street. The sound of engines created a constant rumble that Marlowe could feel in her bones. Flint coordinated teams assigning properties to check, creating a network of communication that spanned the entire Phoenix metro area. Knox's team had been surveilling the Cave Creek property for hours. His report came through on Flint's radio at 9:30. "Old ranch house, maybe 20 acres. Looks abandoned from the road, but there's fresh tire tracks. 2 vehicles parked around back. Black Mercedes SUV registered to Caldwell and an unmarked van. I've also spotted security cameras on the corners of the building." "Tell Knox to hold position," Flint ordered. "Observe only. We're going to need more intel before we move." But at 10 o'clock, Knox's voice crackled through the radio again. This time urgent. "Flint, we got movement. Caldwell's Mercedes just pulled out, heading south on Cave Creek Road. Fast, like he knows something." Marlowe's blood ran cold. He saw the news. Someone must have tipped him off. And indeed, when they checked, the local news was already running footage. Massive gathering of Hells Angels in Phoenix, reason unknown. Police monitoring the situation. Sterling had seen it, realized what Marlowe had done, and he was moving back. Flint made a decision instantly. All teams converge on Cave Creek. Now, we move before he gets too far. But 10 minutes later, Knox reported the Mercedes had gone dark, disappeared onto side roads where they couldn't follow without being spotted. The night stretched on, teams combing the city, following leads that went nowhere. By midnight, exhaustion was setting in. Marlowe hadn't slept in nearly 24 hours. Her eyes burned, her body ached, but she couldn't rest, not while Beck was out there somewhere scared and alone. At 12:30 a.m., Reaper pulled Flint aside. Marlowe saw them talking in low voices, saw the grim expression on Flint's face. When he came back, he sat down heavily beside her. "I need to tell you something about Sterling Caldwell and why this case is personal for me." Marlowe looked at him, waiting. 2 years ago, I was still doing consulting work for the FBI, Organized Crime Division. We got a tip about a trafficking operation running through Phoenix, high-level stuff, protected by people in positions of power. The investigation pointed straight at Sterling Caldwell. Marlowe's breath caught. What happened? The case got shut down, orders from above. Someone with serious juice buried it. All the evidence, all the witness statements, just gone, like it never existed. Flint's jaw clenched. I tried to fight it, tried to keep the investigation alive. That's when I learned how deep the corruption went. Deputy Chief of Police was on the take. A federal prosecutor, 2 judges. They had the whole system locked down. That's why the police wouldn't help me, Marlowe whispered. That's why we're your only hope. Flint met her eyes. I quit the FBI after that, came back to the Hells Angels full time. Figured if I couldn't fight corruption from inside the system, I'd fight it from outside. But I never forgot Sterling Caldwell's name. Never forgot that he was out there hurting people protected by badges and black robes and government positions. He leaned forward. So when you walked into Vera's bar today asking for help against Sterling Caldwell, it wasn't just another rescue operation for me. It was unfinished business. It was a chance to finally take down the man who proved to me that the system I dedicated my life to was rotten at its core. Marlo felt tears streaming down her face again. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry you went through that. Don't apologize. Just know that we're not stopping. Not until Beck is home safe and Sterling Caldwell is in a cage where he belongs. At 1 in the morning, Detective Quinn Hartley arrived at Vera's Roadhouse, a compact woman in her late 30s with sharp features and sharper eyes. She looked around at the assembled bikers with a mixture of caution and respect. Flint Blackwood should have known when dispatch mentioned a missing kid in Hell's Angels that you'd be in the middle of it. Detective Bushum. Flint's nod was respectful. Thanks for coming. Tell me everything, and it better be good enough to justify what we're about to do. Marlo told her story again, showed the photos, laid out Sterling's operation. Detective Hartley's expression grew darker with each detail. This is enough to get warrants for all his properties, Hartley said. But it'll take time. Judges will want to verify, and time is something we don't have. So we do this the fast way, Flint said. We find Beck, you arrest Caldwell with cause, then you get your warrants and build your case. The evidence isn't going anywhere. Hartley studied him for a long moment. You know this could blow up in all our faces. Caldwell's got lawyers who will claim a legal entry violation of his rights and contamination of evidence. I'm a mother looking for my kidnapped son. Marlo's voice was steady. I have every right to try to find him. If these people are helping me, that's on them. But I'm going in with or without you. Something like respect flickered across Hartley's face. Okay, here's how this works. You find Beck, you get him out safe. You radio me immediately. I'll be ready to move in with backup. We'll say we received an anonymous tip about suspicious activity. The evidence on your phone gives us probable cause to investigate. Play it right and this holds up in court. The plan was set, but they still didn't know where Sterling had taken Beck. At 2 in the morning, the count of assembled Hell's Angels had reached 1,500. Word had spread beyond Arizona. Riders from Nevada were arriving, from California, from New Mexico. The parking lot of Vera's Roadhouse and the surrounding streets were packed with motorcycles. Marlo stood outside looking at the sea of leather and chrome and felt something shift inside her. All her life she'd been taught to fear people like this, to cross the street when she saw them, to clutch her purse tighter, to see them as threats. But these people had given her everything when her own world had failed her. They'd given her hope, protection, a family she'd never known she needed. At 3 in the morning, Reaper got a break. His tech team had been monitoring Sterling's phone and credit cards. A ping came through from an ATM in Tempe, Industrial District. He's trying to get cash to run, Reaper said, probably planning to disappear with the kid. Flint gathered his core team. We need to move now, before he goes to ground somewhere we can't find him. But as they prepared to mobilize, Knox's voice came through the radio, urgent. Flint, you need to see this. I've been digging into police records, scanning for Sterling's name in old files. What did you find? Deputy Chief Marcus Wallace, retired last year, lives in Scottsdale. I cross-referenced his financials with Sterling's shell companies. Knox paused. They're connected. Money's been flowing from Caldwell's accounts to Wallace for at least 5 years. But it's more than that, Flint. I found a birth certificate. Deputy Chief Marcus Wallace and Sterling Caldwell share a mother. Different last names, but same woman. They're brothers, Flint said quietly. Half-brothers. Wallace has been protecting Sterling's operation from the inside for years. That's why your FBI case got shut down. That's why the police won't help Marlo. The corruption goes all the way to the top. Marlo felt sick. It was worse than she'd imagined. Sterling hadn't just bought a few corrupt cops. He had family in the police department, family protecting him. We can't trust anyone in law enforcement except Detective Hartley, Flint said. And even she'll have limited authority if Deputy Chief Wallace is pulling strings. What do we do? Marlo asked. Flint looked out at the assembled bikers. 1,500 had become 2,000 as more kept arriving through the night. By the time dawn broke at 5:30, 2,500 Hells Angels filled the streets around Vera's Roadhouse. At 6 in the morning, the final count came in. Riders from across the Southwest had converged on Phoenix. From chapters in 4 states they'd come. answering the call, standing up for a child they'd never met because it was the right thing to do. 3,500 Hell's Angels stood ready. Marlo looked out at them and felt tears streaming down her face. Not from fear anymore, from gratitude, from the overwhelming realization that she wasn't alone, that Beck wasn't alone, that sometimes when the system failed, when society looked away, when power corrupted everything, it touched, ordinary people stood up and did extraordinary things. Flint stood beside her as the sun rose over Phoenix, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. "We ride at 6:30, he said. "We're going to find Beck. And Sterling Caldwell is going to learn that money and connections and corruption can't protect him from what's coming." Marlo looked at the man who'd become her ally, her protector, her friend, in the space of 16 desperate hours. "Why do you do this, Flint, Lily?" He was quiet for a moment, watching the sunrise. "Because Lily deserved better. Because every child deserves to be protected. Because sometimes the monsters win, and I can't change what happened to my family. But I can make sure other families don't suffer the same way. I can stand between evil and innocence and say, not today, not on my watch." He turned to her. "Your Beck is going to come home safe, Marlo. That's a promise. And then Sterling Caldwell is going to face justice. Real justice. Not the kind you buy in courtrooms. The kind you earn by standing up when it matters." The engine started at 6:25. Thousands of Harleys firing up in sequence, creating a sound like rolling thunder. The ground shook. Windows rattled. Phoenix was waking up to something it had never seen before. Marlo climbed onto the back of Flint's motorcycle, her first time ever on one. Her arms wrapped around his waist, her heart hammering with fear and hope and desperate determination. "Hold on tight," Flint said. "We're bringing your boy home." The convoy rolled out at 6:30 a.m. sharp. 3,500 motorcycles moving through Phoenix streets as the city came alive. People stopped on sidewalks, phones out filming. News helicopters appeared within minutes. Social media exploded. And somewhere in the city, Sterling Caldwell saw the news and realized that his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. The sound was like the end of the world and the beginning of hope all at once. Thousands of motorcycles moving through Phoenix as one organism, one purpose, one unstoppable force. The rumble of engines created a physical sensation that vibrated through concrete and steel, through the bones of everyone who heard it, through the very air itself. It was the sound of power. Not the corrupt power of money and influence and backroom deals. The raw power of people united by something greater than themselves. Justice, honor, the protection of an innocent child. Marlo held tight to Flint as his Harley rolled through the streets, part of a convoy that stretched for miles. She'd never been on a motorcycle before. Never imagined she would be. But fear of the unfamiliar had evaporated in the face of something far more terrifying, the possibility of losing Beck forever. The sun climbed higher, turning the desert sky into a brilliant canvas of orange and gold. Phoenix was waking up. People emerged from houses and apartments, drawn by the unprecedented sound. They lined the streets, phones raised, filming. Some looked frightened. Some looked confused. Some, Marlo noticed, looked inspired. An elderly man on a street corner stood at attention, hand over his heart. A veteran, Marlo realized, recognizing fellow warriors. Two young mothers with children, clutched close, waved, understanding perhaps what it meant when a mother fought for her child. A priest outside a church made the sign of the cross, lips moving in what might have been prayer or blessing. Phoenix had never seen anything like this. Thousands of Hell's Angels riding together, death head patches, visible on every vest, moving with military precision through city streets. The formation was deliberate, organized. This wasn't chaos. This was deployment. News helicopters circled overhead like vultures, their cameras broadcasting to a nation that was just beginning to understand what was happening. Social media erupted, Twitter trending, Facebook posts multiplying, Instagram stories spreading across the country. Massive biker gang in Phoenix. Hell's Angels on the move. What's happening in Arizona? But the most viral post came from a teenage girl who'd filmed the convoy passing her apartment. Her caption, "My mom said bikers are scary, but they're riding to save a kidnapped kid. Maybe we've been afraid of the wrong people." Sterling Caldwell saw it all from the security monitors in his Cave Creek property. Watch the news coverage with growing horror. Watch the massive convoy heading north. Toward him. He grabbed his phone, fingers shaking as he dialed. Wallace, Marcus, I need you now. They're coming. Thousands of them. Deputy Chief Marcus Wallace Sterling's half-brother, his protector within the Phoenix Police Department, answered with cold fury. What did you expect, you idiot? You kidnapped the kid from school in broad daylight. You threatened the mother, and now she's brought the Hell's Angels down on your head. You said you'd handle this. You said your connections. My connections can't stop an army of bikers, Sterling. You're on your own. I'm already on a plane to Mexico, and if you're smart, you'll run too. The line went dead. Sterling stared at his phone in disbelief. His brother, his insurance policy, his protection against consequences. Gone. He was alone. He looked at the monitors again. The convoy was getting closer. 20 minutes away. 15. He could see motorcycle after motorcycle filling the screen, an endless river of chrome and leather. Victor, his business partner and lieutenant, stood beside him, equally pale. Boss, we need to move the kid, now. Get out while we still can. Sterling's mind raced. The Tempe warehouse, his main operations center. Underground levels, multiple exits, better security. He could fortify there. Hold out until this blew over. Get the van ready. We're moving to Tempe. Tell Jackson and the others to meet us there. Beck huddled in the corner of the basement room, his dinosaur t-shirt dirty and torn. He'd stopped crying hours ago, cried himself out. Now he just felt numb and scared and desperately wished his mama would come. The door opened. Sterling stood there, and even at 7 years old, Beck could see the fear in the man's eyes. The mask had slipped. The charming stepfather was gone. What remained was something cold and dangerous. Get up. We're leaving. Where's my mama? Beck's voice was small but defiant. Your mama made a mistake. A big mistake. But don't worry. You're going somewhere she'll never find you. Beck felt tears threatening again, but he blinked them back. He remembered what his real daddy used to say back before the fire took him away. Firefighter Daniel Tennyson's words to his son. Be brave, Beck. When you're scared, be brave anyway. That's what heroes do. Beck stood up, tried to be brave. At 7:15 a.m., the massive convoy reached Cave Creek. The small community had never seen anything remotely like this. The motorcycles filled every street, every road, every accessible path. They surrounded Sterling's ranch property in a perfect perimeter, engines idling, creating a continuous roar that could be heard for miles. Marlo climbed off Flint's motorcycle, her legs shaky. She stared at the old ranch house in the distance, her heart pounding. Beck was in there. She could feel it. A mother's instinct that went beyond logic or reason. Let me go in, she said. Let me talk to him. Flint shook his head. Too dangerous. We don't know what kind of security he has, what kind of weapons. Knox approached, radio in hand. Thermal imaging shows the building's almost empty. Heat signatures in the main room, but nothing in the basement where we thought the kid might be. And the Mercedes is gone. Left about 10 minutes before we arrived. Marlo's stomach dropped. He moved him. He saw us coming, and he moved back. Victor's still here, though, Knox continued. Sterling's business partner. Black SUV still parked out back. He's trapped. Flint made a decision. Reaper, take your team to the front entrance. Make yourselves visible. Make some noise. I want Victor to know exactly how surrounded he is. 200 motorcycles moved forward, forming a wall of metal and muscle directly in front of the ranch house. Their engines revved in unison, creating a sound like approaching thunder. Inside, Victor stood at the window watching. His face had gone the color of old paper. He'd been in dangerous situations before, had faced down rival traffickers, corrupt cops looking for bigger bribes, even cartel enforcers who thought they could muscle in on Sterling's territory. But he'd never faced anything like this. Thousands of Hell's Angels. The math was simple and terrifying. He had himself and 2 security guards. They had an army. His phone rang. Sterling, don't answer the door. Don't engage. I'm setting up at Tempe. Hold them off for an hour and then slip out the back. I'll pay you double. Victor hung up, looked at the sea of bikers surrounding the property, looked at his 2 guards, both of whom looked ready to bolt. Hold him off for an hour, Sterling had lost his mind. Victor made his own decision, one based purely on survival. He walked to the front door and opened it. 200 bikers stared back at him, but it was the woman who stepped forward that made him hesitate. Not because she looked dangerous, because she looked like someone who had absolutely nothing left to lose. Marlo Tennyson, the nurse still wearing yesterday's scrubs, mascara long since cried away, hair a mess, but her eyes burned with something that made Victor, a man who'd trafficked hundreds of people across international borders, take an involuntary step back. A mother's fury. "Where is my son?" Marlo's voice cut through the engine noise like a knife. "He's not here." Sterling moved him. "Where?" Victor hesitated, looked at the assembled bikers, looked at Flint Blackwood, the former FBI consultant who'd nearly brought down their entire operation 2 years ago, looked at thousands of reasons to tell the truth. Tempe, industrial complex on Bay Street and 5th. That's his main operation center. "You're lying." Marlo stepped closer. "You're trying to buy him time." "I'm trying to save my own skin, lady." Victor pulled out his phone. "Here. Everything. His whole operation. Names, dates, routes, financial records. It's all on here. Sterling's finished either way. I'm not going down with him." Flint took the phone, scrolled through it. His expression darkened with each swipe. "It's real," he said quietly. "Victor, you just handed us evidence of the biggest trafficking network in the Southwest. Then we have a deal. I cooperate, I walk." "That's not up to me." Flint gestured to Detective Hartley, who'd arrived with her two trusted officers. "That's up to her." Hartley stepped forward, all business. "Victor Reeves, you're under arrest for human trafficking, kidnapping, and about 24 other charges I'm going to enjoy reading to you. But if you cooperate fully, if you testify against Sterling Caldwell and everyone else in his network, I'll talk to the DA about a deal." Victor nodded, relief flooding his face. Going to prison was better than facing thousands of Hell's Angels or Sterling's wrath when he inevitably fell. As Hartley's officers cuffed Victor and led him away, Marlo turned to Flint. "Tempe, we need to go now." "Already on it." Flint was on his radio coordinating with team leaders. "All units, new target. Industrial complex, Bay Street and 5th Avenue, Tempe. Converge immediately." The convoy reformed, the massive force of motorcycles pulling away from Cave Creek, leaving stunned residents in their wake. News helicopters followed, broadcasting every moment. In living rooms across America, people watched. A nation transfixed by the unprecedented sight. Commentary ranged from fearful to supportive. Vigilante justice is dangerous. Sometimes the system fails and people have to act. That's a mother fighting for her child. Those are Hell's Angels, criminals. Those are Americans standing up for what's right. The debate raged, but the convoy didn't slow. Sterling watched the news coverage from his Tempe warehouse, his sanctuary feeling less secure by the minute. He had Jackson and 3 other armed security guards. The warehouse was reinforced concrete, multiple exits, underground tunnels leading to adjacent buildings. But none of that seemed adequate against thousands of bikers who just surrounded his Cave Creek property and extracted Victor in less than 20 minutes. He looked at Beck, zip-tied to a chair in the corner of the main floor. The boy stared back at him with those wide brown eyes, not crying anymore, just watching, waiting. Sterling felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine fear. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "We're coming, every exit, every tunnel, every escape route. You're trapped. Let the boy go and maybe you survive this." Sterling threw the phone against the wall, watching it shatter. Rage replacing fear. Who did they think they were? He was Sterling Caldwell, Phoenix Business Journal's rising star. He had money, connections, power, but his half-brother had fled to Mexico. His business partner had surrendered. His carefully constructed empire was crumbling in real time on national television. At 8:45 a.m., the massive convoy began arriving in Tempe's industrial district. The area, normally quiet on weekend mornings, erupted with sound and activity. Workers at nearby businesses emerged filming. Residents of converted loft apartments leaned out windows. The Hells Angels surrounded the entire block where Sterling's warehouse stood. Not just the building itself, the entire city block. Every street, every alley, every possible exit route. Bay Street disappeared under a sea of motorcycles. Fifth Avenue became impassable. Side streets filled with leather and chrome. The formation was methodical. Perfect. No gaps, no weaknesses. Sterling watched from security monitors, his hands shaking. They'd actually done it, surrounded an entire city block. Jackson, his head of security, stood beside him. Former military, 20 years in private security. He'd protected dictators, drug lords, corporate executives with enemies. Boss, I've never seen anything like this. We can't fight our way out. We can't sneak out. We're trapped. Then we hold out. They can't stay here forever. Eventually, the police will have to intervene. But even as Sterling said it, he knew it was a fantasy. The police were already there. He could see Detective Hartley on the monitors talking with Flint Blackwood, see uniformed officers setting up perimeters. But they weren't moving against the bikers. They were coordinating with them. At 9 a.m., Flint's voice boomed through a megaphone amplified and carried by the morning air. Sterling Caldwell, we know you're in there. We know you have Beck Tennyson. Release the boy unharmed, and you walk out of here alive. Harm him, and I can't guarantee what thousands of very angry people might do. Inside the warehouse, Sterling's remaining guards exchanged glances. The calculation was simple. They were being paid to protect Sterling's interests, but no amount of money was worth facing down an army. One guard, a younger man named Torres, spoke up. Boss, maybe we should consider what surrender to a bunch of criminals on motorcycles. They're not the criminals here, boss. Torres's voice was quiet but firm. We are. Sterling spun on him, fury in his eyes. You're fired. Get out. Torres nodded slowly. Gladly. He walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out with his hands raised. Two Hells Angels immediately moved forward, searched him for weapons, and escorted him away from the building. That left Jackson and two other guards. Sterling could see the doubt in their eyes, too. Double pay, Sterling said desperately. Triple pay. Just hold this position until I can make some calls. Get this sorted out. But his phone was shattered. His connections had fled. His brother had abandoned him. There was nothing to sort out. At 9:15, Marlowe's voice joined Flint's on the megaphone. She'd insisted. This was her son, her fight. Beck, baby, if you can hear me, Mama's here. I'm right outside. You're going to be okay. I promise you are going to be okay. Inside, Beck heard his mother's voice and started crying again. But this time they were tears of hope. She'd come. His mama had come for him. Mama, he screamed as loud as his 7-year-old lungs could manage. Mama, I'm here. Marlowe heard it, faint but unmistakable. Her son's voice. He's alive, she whispered. Then louder to Flint. He's alive and he's scared and I'm going in there. Marlowe, wait. But she was already moving, walking toward the warehouse entrance, unarmed, unprotected, driven by nothing but a mother's love and desperation. Thousands of Hells Angels watched, not intervening, recognizing that this was her moment, her choice, her courage. Marlowe reached the warehouse door and knocked, not timidly, firmly, demanding. Sterling, let me in. Let me trade myself for Beck. You want leverage, I'm your leverage. Let my son go. Inside, Sterling saw an opportunity, a hostage trade. He could use Marlowe to negotiate safe passage, maybe even salvage this disaster. Jackson, bring her in. Carefully, check her for weapons and wires. The door opened. Jackson stood there, a man in his 40s, with dead eyes and a conscience long since buried under years of doing terrible things for money. He looked at Marlowe, saw the hospital scrubs, the exhaustion, the desperate love of a mother willing to trade her life for her child's. And something shifted in him. Ma'am, he said quietly, I have a daughter. She's 8, same age as the boss's last victim. He paused. I'm not doing this anymore. He turned to Sterling. I'm out, boss. Done. This crosses a line I won't cross. Sterling's face contorted with rage. You're all cowards, every one of you. The two remaining guards looked at each other, looked at Jackson walking out with his hands raised, looked at Sterling, whose mask had completely shattered, revealing the monster underneath. They followed Jackson out the door. Sterling was alone with Beck. For a long moment, silence stretched across the industrial block. Thousands of engines had gone quiet. Everyone waiting, watching. Then Sterling appeared in the doorway, gun in one hand, Beck's arm gripped in the other. The boy stumbled, trying to keep up terror written across his young face. "Back off," Sterling's voice cracked. "All of you back off or I'll kill him. I swear to God, I'll kill him." Marlowe's world narrowed to a single point. Beck, her son, 20 feet away, a gun pressed to his small head. Every nightmare scenario ran through her mind, every terrible possibility. But she forced herself to stay calm, to be what Beck needed, to be strong. "Sterling," her voice was steady despite her shaking hands. "Look at me, not them, me." His eyes found hers, wild, desperate. "You want to hurt someone, hurt me. I'm the one who found your files. I'm the one who brought them here. Beck didn't do anything. He's 7 years old. Let him go and take me instead." "Nobody's taking anybody." Flint stepped forward, slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. "Sterling, you're done. Your operation is exposed. Victor gave us everything. Your half-brother fled the country. Your guards walked away. It's over. Don't make it worse by hurting a child." "Worse?" Sterling laughed, a sound edging toward hysteria. "How could it possibly be worse? I'm finished. My life is over. Because of her." He gestured with the gun toward Marlowe. "Because some nurse couldn't mind her own business. Because you kidnapped my son." Marlowe's control finally cracked. "Because you're a monster who traffics human beings. Because you built your entire life on suffering and pain, and you thought you'd never face consequences. I had it all under control. I had protection. You had nothing," Flint's voice cut through Sterling's rant. "You had an illusion, a facade, and facades eventually crumble. Today's your day of reckoning, Sterling. How it ends is up to you." For a moment, Sterling seemed to consider. The gun wavered. Beck whimpered. Then Sterling's eyes hardened. "If I'm going down, I'm taking them." He never finished the sentence. Marlowe had been slowly edging closer during the conversation. Close enough that when Sterling's attention focused on Flint, she launched herself forward with every ounce of strength she possessed. She wasn't trained in combat, wasn't strong or skilled, but she was a mother protecting her child, and that made her unstoppable. She hit Sterling at waist level, her momentum carrying them both sideways. The gun went off, the bullet going wild, shattering a warehouse window. Beck screamed and ran straight into the arms of Luna, who'd been positioned to grab him. Marlowe and Sterling crashed to the ground. He tried to bring the gun around to aim at her, but she fought with desperate fury. Clawing, punching, doing everything she could to keep that weapon pointed away from Beck. Then Flint was there, his massive hand closing around Sterling's wrist, squeezing until bones ground together, and the gun clattered to the pavement. Reaper and Knox pulled Sterling off, Marlowe dragging him to his feet as Detective Hartley rushed forward with handcuffs. "Sterling Caldwell, you're under arrest for kidnapping, human trafficking, attempted murder, and a list of other charges that's going to take me an hour to read." Sterling's legs gave out. The reality crashed down on him. It was over. Truly over. Thousands of Hell's Angels erupted in a victory roar that shook the industrial district. Engines revved, horns blared, people cheered. But Marlowe heard none of it. She ran to where Luna held Beck, dropped to her knees, and pulled her son into her arms. Beck clung to her, both of them, crying, and both of them whole, both of them safe. "Mama, you came. You really came." "Always, baby, always. Nobody takes you from me. Nobody." Flint stood back, giving them their moment. His eyes were suspiciously bright. Around him, hardened bikers who'd seen war and violence, and the worst humanity had to offer wiped at their own eyes. Because some things transcended toughness. Some things reminded even the hardest men what they were fighting for. Love, family, the protection of innocence. Detective Hartley approached Flint as Sterling was loaded into a police van, still screaming threats that no longer held any power. "That was the most insane thing I've ever witnessed," she said, "and I can't officially condone any of it. But off the record," she held out her hand, "thank you. You did what the system couldn't." Flint shook it. The system failed because corruption rotted it from the inside. Maybe this is a wake-up call. Maybe. Hartley looked at Victor's phone, still in Flint's possession. That evidence is going to bring down a lot of people. Sterling's network runs deep. 7 other Phoenix businessmen are on there. All respected community members, all rotten underneath. Make sure they all face justice, not just Sterling. You have my word. As the police presence began to thin and the immediate crisis passed, the thousands of Hell's Angels began their departure. Not all at once, in waves, orderly, respectful, each group stopping to say goodbye to Marlowe and Beck. Ghost, the 73-year-old Korean War veteran, knelt beside Beck. You're a brave young man. Your father would be proud. My daddy died, Beck said quietly. He was a firefighter. I know, and I bet he's watching from heaven right now, proud as can be. You've got a warrior's heart, son, just like him. Luna hugged Marlowe tight. You ever need anything, sister? Anything at all. We're family now. Reaper and Knox and dozens of others, each offering words of support, contact information, promises of continued protection. By noon, the industrial district had mostly cleared. The news helicopters had moved on to other stories. The viral social media posts were being replaced by new trending topics. But for Marlowe and Beck, the world had fundamentally changed. They sat in the back of an ambulance being checked by paramedics. Beck had bruises and dehydration, but nothing serious. Marlowe had a split lip and bruised ribs from her tackle of Sterling, but she barely felt it. Flint approached his leather vest dusty from the morning's events. Paramedics say you're both going to be fine. I'm heading back to Vera's with most of the crew. You need anything before I go? Marlowe stood wincing slightly. I need to thank you for everything, for believing me, for mobilizing an army for a stranger's child, for giving me back my son. You gave yourself back your son, Flint corrected gently. That tackle was all you. I just provided backup. Thousands of backups, he smiled. We believe in overwhelming force when it comes to protecting kids. Beck tugged on Flint's vest. Are you a good guy or a bad guy? The question made Flint laugh, a sound that transformed his weathered face. I'm just a guy who helps when he can, buddy. Your mama's the hero here. She never gave up on you. But you helped, Beck insisted. You and all your friends with the motorcycles. Mom said everyone thinks bikers are scary, but you're not scary. Well, maybe a little scary, but nice scary. Nice scary. Flint repeated the phrase, his smile widening. I'll take that. He looked at Marlowe. What happens now? Do you have somewhere safe to go? Sterling's operation had a lot of people. Some might try to retaliate. I don't know. The exhaustion was finally catching up to Marlowe. I don't know anything anymore. My apartment, my life, everything was built around Sterling. I don't even know where to start rebuilding. You start by taking it one day at a time. Flint pulled out a card, handed it to her. This is my number. You call if you need anything. Protection, advice, or just someone to talk to who understands. And Vera's bar that's always open to you. We take care of our own. Your own. You walked into our world asking for help. We answered. That makes you family to know. As Flint walked away, climbing onto his Harley, Marlowe watched the remaining motorcycles begin their final dispersal, heading back to their lives in Arizona, Nevada, California, New Mexico, back to wigs and families and the ordinary struggles of ordinary people. But they'd come together for something extraordinary, for a child they didn't know, for a mother they'd never met, because it was right. Detective Hartley approached as the last of the bikes rolled out. I'm going to need both of you to give formal statements. But it can wait until tomorrow. Go home. Rest. Try to process all this. What happens to Sterling? Marlowe asked. With Victor's testimony and the evidence on his phone, plus what we'll find when we search his properties, he's never seeing freedom again. Life sentence minimum. Probably multiple life sentences. Hartley paused. And the 7 other men in his network, they're all going down too. Phoenix's elite is about to learn that no amount of money or influence protects you from justice when the evidence is this solid. Marlowe nodded, feeling a weight lift. It was really over. Sterling couldn't hurt them anymore. That night back at her apartment, Marlowe tucked Beck into his own bed for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. He was clean-fed, safe. The bruises would fade. The fear would diminish. They would heal. Mama, Beck's voice was sleepy. Can we bring Flint cookies sometime to say thank you? Marlowe smiled through fresh tears. Absolutely, baby. The best cookies we can make. Chocolate chip. Mountains of them. Mountains, she agreed. As Beck drifted off to sleep, Marlowe sat watching him, one hand on his chest, and to feel the rise and fall of his breathing. to confirm he was really here, really safe. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Sleep well tonight, Marlowe. You earned it. Sterling's officially charged with 47 counts. He's not getting out, ever. Flint." She responded simply, "Thank you." But the words felt insufficient for what Flint and the Hells Angels had done. She'd have to find better words later, better ways to express gratitude for the gift of her son's life. For now, she had Beck back. That was all that mattered. In a maximum security holding cell across town, Sterling Caldwell sat alone. His expensive suit rumpled, his carefully constructed mask shattered beyond repair. The man who'd built an empire on suffering faced the first night of what would be thousands. Trapped, powerless, forgotten. While across Phoenix, in homes and apartments and clubhouses, thousands of people who'd answered the call slept peacefully, knowing they'd done right, knowing they'd stood up when it mattered, knowing they'd proven one more time that honor doesn't wear expensive suits. Sometimes honor wears leather. Sometimes it rides a Harley. Sometimes it shows up when everyone else looks away. The Phoenix General Hospital emergency room had never felt so strange to Marlowe. She'd worked there for 8 years, knew every hallway and supply closet, every doctor and nurse by name. But walking through those automatic doors at 11 that morning, still wearing yesterday's scrubs, bruised and exhausted, and holding Beck's hand, she felt like a stranger in her own world. Her colleagues stared, not with judgment, but with something closer to awe. The news had spread faster than desert wildfire. Marlo Tennyson, the quiet nurse who always took extra shifts, who never complained, who kept to herself, had mobilized thousands of Hell's Angels to rescue her kidnapped son. It seemed impossible, like something from a movie, not from the life of someone they saw every day in the break room. Dr. Patricia Walsh, the ER chief, intercepted them immediately. "Marlo, oh my God, Marlo." She pulled her into a careful hug, mindful of the visible bruises. "We've been watching the news. Everyone has. Are you okay? Is Beck okay?" "We're alive." Marlowe's voice was hoarse from crying, from screaming, from a night and morning that had aged her a decade. "That's all that matters." Dr. Walsh ushered them into a private exam room. The hospital's best pediatrician checked Beck thoroughly. Bruises on his wrists from zip ties, dehydration, elevated stress hormones. But nothing broken, nothing permanent. He would heal. While Beck was examined, Marlo sat in the hallway staring at her hands. They were shaking, had been shaking since the moment she'd tackled Sterling, since the gun had gone off, since she'd realized how close she'd come to losing everything. Bryn found her there, the colleague who'd shared her own story 6 months ago about the Hells Angels finding her runaway daughter. Bryn sat down beside Marlo without a word, just took her hand and held it. "You remembered," Bryn said finally. "I remembered. And you were brave enough to ask for help. I was desperate enough." Marlo looked at her friend. "You told me they were good people. I didn't believe you. Not really. I thought you were exaggerating because you were grateful. And now I know you were understating it. They saved my son's life. They showed me what real honor looks like." Marlo paused. "And they showed me how wrong I've been about so many things." Over the next 72 hours, the media storm intensified. Sterling Caldwell's arrest dominated every local news station, then spread to national coverage. The businessman who'd been featured in glossy magazines, who'd sat on charity boards, who'd networked with politicians and judges, was now front-page news for all the wrong reasons. But the story that captivated America wasn't just Sterling's fall. It was the thousands of Hells Angels who'd ridden to save a child. The viral videos of motorcycles surrounding city blocks. The image of Marlo tackling an armed man to protect her son. The interviews with bikers who explained simply, "A kid needed help. We helped." The narrative shifted, slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. Social media debates raged. "These are the people we're supposed to fear. My grandfather was a Hell's Angel, kindest man I ever knew. Maybe we've been judging wrong all along." And counter-arguments. "They're still criminals. Vigilante justice is dangerous. The ends don't justify the means. What about the rule of law?" But public opinion was turning. Poll after poll showed the same trend. Americans, especially those over 50, who remembered a time when community meant something, when neighbors looked out for neighbors, increasingly sided with the Hells Angels. One viral tweet summed it up. A nurse asked bikers for help. Thousands showed up. Her rich husband asked police for protection. They're still looking for his half-brother in Mexico. Tell me again who the criminals are. Detective Quinn Hartley became the face of the official investigation. In a press conference on April 17th, she stood before cameras and laid out the case that would bury Sterling Caldwell and his network. Thanks to evidence provided by Victor Reeves and recovered from Mr. Caldwell's properties, we've identified a human trafficking operation that has been active for at least 15 years. The investigation has expanded to include 7 other Phoenix businessmen, all of whom held positions of trust and respectability in this community. She paused, letting that sink in. This operation moved approximately 200 victims across state and international borders. The youngest victim we've identified was 14. The financial records show profits exceeding $40 million. A reporter shouted a question. What about the Hells Angels' involvement, and will they face charges for the rescue? Hartley's expression didn't change. The Hells Angels responded to a desperate mother's plea for help in finding her kidnapped child. They located the child and turned over evidence to law enforcement. At no point did they violate any laws. In fact, their assistance was invaluable to this investigation. Another reporter, what about Deputy Chief Marcus Wallace? Former Deputy Chief Wallace is currently wanted for questioning in connection with obstruction of justice and accepting bribes. We believe he fled to Mexico. We're working with international authorities to secure his extradition. The press conference continued, but Marlo stopped watching. She didn't need to see Sterling's crimes enumerated on national television. She knew what he was, had seen it with her own eyes. What mattered now was keeping Beck safe while he healed, and that meant leaving the apartment they'd shared with Sterling, the home that no longer felt safe. Flint called on April 18th. How are you holding up? We're staying with a friend from work, but I don't know what happens next. I can't afford to keep taking time off. Can't afford a new apartment on my salary. Can't afford... She stopped, hearing the desperation creeping into her voice. The Hells Angels have resources, Flint said quietly. Legitimate resources. We run charity programs, help families in crisis. Would you let us help you get back on your feet? Marlo's pride warred with practicality. She'd been raised to stand on her own, to never accept handouts. But she'd also learned in the past few days that accepting help wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. Yes, thank you, yes. Within a week, the Hells Angels Family Support Network had helped Marlo find a small house to rent in a safe neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but clean and affordable, and most importantly, somewhere Sterling had never been. Somewhere Beck could feel safe. They moved in on April 25th. Dozens of Hells Angels showed up to help, carrying boxes, assembling furniture, making sure the locks were changed and the security system was installed. By evening, the house was livable. More than livable. It was a home. Vera, the bar owner, brought over a casserole and a stern look. You eat, you rest, you heal, and you remember you are not alone anymore. The trial was set for October, 6 months away. 6 months for prosecutors to build an airtight case. 6 months for Marlo and Beck to begin healing from trauma that would take years to fully process. Beck started therapy in May with Dr. Hannah Winters, a specialist in childhood trauma who volunteered through a nonprofit program run by the Hells Angels. The sessions were gentle, age-appropriate, focused on helping Beck understand that what happened wasn't his fault, that he was safe now, that the nightmares would eventually fade. He's remarkably resilient, Dr. Winters told Marlo after the first month. He has a strong support system, a mother who fought for him, a community that rallied around him. Those things matter more than people realize. The nightmares did come. Beck would wake screaming certain Sterling was in the room. Marlo would hold him, rock him, remind him over and over that Sterling was in jail, that the bad man couldn't hurt him anymore. But slowly the nightmares decreased. Once every night became once every few nights. Then once a week, Beck started smiling again, started talking about dinosaurs with his old enthusiasm, started being 7 years old again instead of a traumatized victim. Flint visited regularly, not as an investigator or protector anymore, but as something closer to family. He'd bring Beck books about dinosaurs, take him fishing at nearby lakes, teach him to throw a football in the backyard. A father figure emerging naturally without force or expectation. Beck adored him, would run to the door whenever Flint's motorcycle rumbled up the street, would chatter excitedly about his week, about school, about the T-Rex skeleton he wanted to see at the museum. And Flint, this mountain of a man who'd lost his own daughter to a drunk driver years before, found healing in Beck's innocence and joy, found purpose in being present for a child who needed a steady male influence. Marlo watched their bond grow and felt grateful beyond words. Beck deserved this, deserved to know that not all men were monsters like Sterling, that some men were protectors, mentors, heroes who showed up when they said they would. Summer passed, Beck's bruises faded. Marlo returned to work part-time, then full-time, as Beck started second grade in August. His new school was informed about the situation, given photos of Sterling, and instructions to never release Beck to anyone but Marlo, or specifically authorized individuals. The precautions felt paranoid until Marlo remembered that Sterling's network had included 7 other powerful men. Men who were now facing their own arrests and trials. Men who might want revenge. But the Hells Angels maintained a quiet presence. Different members rotating through, always nearby, but never intrusive. Watching Beck's school, monitoring Marlo's work, making sure Sterling's associates understood that any retaliation would be met with overwhelming force. September brought preparation for the trial. Marlo met with prosecutors dozens of times, going over her testimony, reviewing evidence, preparing for the defense's inevitable attacks on her character and credibility. They're going to paint you as an unstable woman who overreacted to a custody dispute, the lead prosecutor, Janet Morrison, warned. They'll claim Sterling was protecting Beck from you. Let them try, Marlo's voice was steel. I have photos of his trafficking operation. I have Victor's testimony. I have the physical evidence of what he did to Beck. The truth is on my side. The trial began on October 15th. The courthouse steps were packed with media protesters, both for and against Sterling, and dozens of Hells Angels who'd come to show support. Marlo walked through them with Beck holding her hand and Flint beside her. The cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but she kept her head high, her focus forward. Inside, the courtroom was standing room only. The gallery filled with Sterling's victims, their families, and more Hells Angels than the bailiffs knew what to do with. They weren't threatening, weren't disruptive, just present. A silent statement that justice was being watched. Sterling sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, trying to project the same charm and confidence that had fooled so many for so long. But Marlo could see the fear in his eyes when he looked at the packed gallery, could see him realize that his money and connections couldn't save him this time. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Prosecutor Morrison methodically built a case so damning that even Sterling's high-priced defense team couldn't find holes. Victor testified for 2 days, laying out the entire trafficking operation in excruciating detail. Financial experts showed the money trail. Victims testified, their voices shaking but determined, about how Sterling's network had destroyed their lives. Marlo testified on October 24th. She wore a simple blue dress, no jewelry, no makeup beyond the basics. She wanted the jury to see her as she was. A working mother, a nurse, an ordinary woman who'd discovered her husband was a monster. The defense attorney, a silver-haired man named Chambers, who specialized in representing wealthy criminals, tried to shake her. Mrs. Caldwell, isn't it true that you were struggling financially before you met my client? Yes, I was a widowed single mother working as a nurse. Money was tight. And isn't it true that marrying Mr. Caldwell provided you with financial security you'd never had before? Yes. So when you found documents that you claim implicated him in criminal activity, you had a choice. Report it and lose that financial security, or use it as leverage in a divorce. Marlo met his eyes steadily. I had a choice. Report a trafficking operation and save innocent lives, or stay silent and become complicit in their suffering. I chose to do the right thing. Even though it meant losing your comfortable lifestyle. My son was kidnapped and held at gunpoint. There was nothing comfortable about any of this. Chambers changed tactics. You claim Mr. Caldwell threatened you, yet you didn't go to the police first. You went to a motorcycle gang. I went to people I knew would help when the system couldn't. The police had Deputy Chief Wallace on Sterling's payroll. Going through official channels would have gotten Beck killed. So you took the law into your own hands. I asked for help finding my kidnapped child. The Hells Angels provided that help and turned over evidence to proper authorities. That's not vigilantism. That's community support. The exchange continued, but Chambers couldn't shake Marlo's testimony. She was too honest, too straightforward, too clearly a victim rather than a vindictive ex-wife. When Beck testified, the courtroom went silent. The judge had arranged for him to testify via video from another room, sparing him the trauma of facing Sterling directly. But his words carried weight. He took me from school. He said Mama was never going to see me again. He tied my hands and put me in a dark room. I was scared. The defense tried to claim Sterling was protecting Beck from an unstable mother. But Beck's simple, childlike honesty destroyed that narrative. Mama's the best. She works hard and she loves me, and she makes me feel safe. He was the scary one. His smile was fake. Out of the mouths of children, truth emerged uncomplicated by adult rationalizations. The verdict came on November 4th. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all 47 counts. The courtroom erupted. Victims wept with relief. Hell's Angels stood and applauded until the judge gavelled for order. Sterling's face went pale, his expensive lawyers already whispering about appeals that everyone knew were futile. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Judge Catherine Morrison, no relation to the prosecutor, was a 60-year-old woman known for her fairness and her intolerance for corruption. She looked at Sterling with open contempt. Mr. Caldwell, in my 30 years on the bench, I've seen many criminals, but few have operated with your level of calculated cruelty. You used your position, your wealth, and your social standing to prey upon the vulnerable. You trafficked human beings. You kidnapped a child. You corrupted law enforcement and betrayed every trust placed in you. She paused, letting the words sink in. The prosecution has recommended life without possibility of parole. I'm inclined to exceed that recommendation. You are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without parole on each of the trafficking counts to be served consecutively. Additionally, you are sentenced to 20 years on each kidnapping count, also consecutive. The total sentence amounts to 450 years in federal prison. Sterling's legs buckled. His lawyers caught him as he collapsed. Judge Morrison wasn't finished. Furthermore, all your assets are to be seized and distributed to your victims as restitution. You will die in prison, Mr. Caldwell, and I hope that in whatever time you have left, you find some small measure of the suffering you inflicted on others. She looked out at the gallery at Marlowe holding Beck at the Hell's Angels who'd made this justice possible. To my Tennyson, I want to say something from the bench, which I rarely do. Your courage in the face of evil, your willingness to fight for your child despite the odds, and your decision to seek help from unconventional sources saved not just your son's life, but potentially hundreds of future victims. This court commends you. She turned to where Flint and the other Hell's Angels sat. To the members of the Hell's Angels Motorcycle Club, this court also extends recognition. You acted when the system failed. You protected the innocent. You demonstrated that honor and justice can be found in unexpected places. Society may judge you by your appearance, but your actions speak louder than any stereotype. The gavel came down. Court adjourned. Sterling Caldwell was led away in chains, his empire destroyed, his freedom gone forever. Outside the courthouse, Marlowe stood before a wall of cameras and reporters, Beck beside her, Flint and dozens of Hell's Angels behind her. She prepared no statement, but words came anyway. 6 months ago, I thought my world had ended. I thought I had lost everything that mattered. But I learned something important. I learned that help comes from unexpected places, that character isn't defined by clothing or social status, but by what people do when someone needs them. She gestured to the Hell's Angels. These people whose society teaches us to fear, who we cross the street to avoid, saved my son's life. They asked for nothing in return. They simply saw someone in need and responded. That's real heroism. That's real honor. A reporter shouted a question. What's next for you and Beck? Marlowe looked at her son, at his gap-toothed smile, at the resilience shining in his eyes. We heal, we rebuild, and we try to pay forward the kindness we've been shown. But even as she said it, Marlowe knew healing and rebuilding wouldn't be enough. The experience had changed her fundamentally. She couldn't go back to her quiet life pretending the world's injustices weren't her problem. She'd seen too much, learned too much. She had to do more. In November, Marlowe made a decision. She gave notice at Phoenix General. Her colleagues were shocked, tried to convince her to stay. But she'd found a new calling. On January 10th, 10 months after Beck's rescue, Marlowe stood in a small office space in downtown Phoenix. The sign on the door read, Phoenix Rising Foundation. support for trafficking, survivors, and families in crisis. Flint had helped her navigate the nonprofit paperwork. Luna had connected her with grants and funding sources. Vera had organized a fundraiser that brought in enough seed money to get started. The Hells Angels as an organization had become the foundation's primary partner, providing security resources and volunteer support. The foundation's mission was simple: help people who fell through the cracks of the system. Trafficking, survivors who needed safe housing and counseling. Families fleeing domestic violence who needed protection. Anyone who needed help and had nowhere else to turn. The first client came on January 15th, a young woman named Jessica escaping an abusive relationship. Her husband had connections to the police. The restraining order meant nothing. He'd threatened to take their daughter. Marlo listened to her story and felt a painful recognition. She'd been there, knew that desperation. "You're safe now," Marlo promised. "We'll help you." Within 24 hours, the foundation had Jessica and her daughter in a secure apartment. Luna provided counseling. Reaper's team established security protocols. Detective Hartley, now promoted to captain, worked with them to build a case against the abusive husband that bypassed his police connections. The rescue was successful. Jessica's husband was arrested. The daughter was safe. One family saved. One small victory against the darkness. But it was a beginning. By March, Phoenix Rising had helped 12 families. By June 43, the foundation grew rapidly, fueled by donations from people who'd watched Marlo's story on national news and wanted to support her mission. Staffed by volunteers from the Hells Angels community and professionals who believed in the cause. Marlo worked 18-hour days, pouring everything into helping others the way she'd been helped. Beck spent afternoons at the foundation office doing homework while his mother changed lives. He understood in his 8-year-old way that what they were doing mattered, that his mama had turned their nightmare into something good. April 15th marked the 1-year anniversary of Beck's kidnapping and rescue. The date was burned into Marlo's memory, the worst and best day of her life. The day she'd lost everything and found unexpected family. The Hells Angels organized a ceremony at Vera's Roadhouse. 200 members gathered along with families. The foundation had helped local officials and media covering the anniversary. Vera stood at a makeshift podium, her weathered face serious. 1 year ago, a desperate mother walked through that door asking for help. She'd been taught to fear us. Society told her we were dangerous. But she was more desperate than she was afraid. And we answered her call. She gestured to Marlo. Today we gather to recognize not just what we did for her, but what she's done since. Phoenix Rising Foundation has helped 63 families in 3 months. 63 families who might have fallen through the cracks, who might have suffered in silence, who might have lost hope. Vera held up a leather vest smaller than the men's versions, tailored to fit Marlo's frame, the death head patch prominent on the back. Marlo Tennyson, by unanimous vote of the Phoenix chapter, we induct you as an honorary member of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. Not for what you've done, but for who you are. You embody the values we hold sacred: courage, loyalty, protection of the innocent, standing up when others look away. Marlo stood, tears streaming down her face as Vera helped her into the vest. It settled on her shoulders with a weight that felt right, a symbol of belonging, of family, of a journey from fear to understanding to acceptance. Flint stepped forward and pinned the death head patch. "You're one of us now, Marlo. Family. Forever." The room erupted in applause. Beck jumped up and down, proud of his mama. Hells Angels stood and cheered for the woman who'd proven that courage came in all forms. Marlo looked out at them through blurred vision. These people who'd been strangers a year ago, who'd answered a desperate plea without hesitation, who'd shown her that the world's judgments were often backwards, that honor and heroism weren't about appearance or social standing, but about action and character. "Thank you," she managed to say, "for everything, for Beck, for this, for showing me what real family means." The party continued late into the night. Stories were shared, bonds were strengthened, and Marlo, wearing her leather vest with pride, felt truly home for the first time since Daniel had died 4 years ago. The second anniversary of Beck's rescue brought an even larger gathering. Thousands of Hells Angels returned to Phoenix for a memorial ride. From across 4 states, they came just as they had 2 years earlier, but this time for celebration rather than crisis. The route was planned carefully, starting at Vera's Roadhouse where it all began. past the Cave Creek property where they'd first surrounded Sterling, through Tempe's industrial district where the final confrontation had happened, ending at the Arizona State Capitol where they'd hold a rally for trafficking, awareness, and victims' rights. Marlowe rode with Flint Beck strapped safely in front of her, wearing a junior-sized leather vest that the Phoenix chapter had made for him. The rumble of thousands of engines created that familiar earth-shaking thunder. But this time, Marlowe felt joy instead of desperation. Phoenix had come out to watch, streets lined with people cheering, waving, showing support. The narrative had completely shifted in 2 years. Hell's Angels were no longer automatically feared. They were recognized as community protectors, as the people who showed up when others wouldn't. At the Capitol, Beck gave a speech. Standing on a stage in front of thousands, the 9-year-old boy spoke with a clarity that silenced the crowd. 2 years ago, a bad man took me. I was really scared, but my mama didn't give up. She asked these people for help. He gestured to the assembled bikers. Everyone said bikers are scary, but they saved my life. They're heroes. He paused, looking out at the sea of leather vests. My teacher says we shouldn't judge books by their covers. I think we shouldn't judge people by their clothes either. We should judge them by if they help people or hurt people. These bikers help people. That makes them good. The simplicity of childhood wisdom. The truth unobscured by adult complications. The crowd roared approval. Beck grinned, gap-toothed and innocent, and completely unaware of how profound his message was. Later at Desert Springs Elementary for Career Day, Beck introduced Flint to his 4th grade class. This is Flint. He was in the Army. Now he rides motorcycles and helps people. He's like my uncle. Flint, this intimidating mountain of a man with tattoos and scar and a beard that reached his chest, talked to 9-year-olds about service, about protecting others, about how being a hero didn't mean wearing a cape or having superpowers. It meant showing up when you were needed. The students listened, enraptured. Several asked if they could be Hell's Angels when they grew up. Flint smiled. You can be anything you want. Just remember to help people, stand up for what's right, and don't judge others by how they look. The teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, thanked him afterward. You know, I had reservations when Beck said he wanted to bring a biker for Career Day, but that was exactly the lesson these kids needed to hear. We're not what people expect, Flint agreed, but maybe that's the point. Maybe expectations need to be challenged. In his maximum security prison cell, Sterling Caldwell watched news coverage of the memorial ride on a small television, saw thousands of motorcycles, saw Marlowe wearing a Hell's Angels vest, saw Beck healthy and happy and thriving. Everything Sterling had tried to destroy had flourished. His victims had become survivors, activists, voices for change. His empire had been dismantled and its resources redistributed to help rather than harm. His name had become synonymous with evil, while those he tried to hurt had become symbols of resilience. He'd lost everything. They'd gained everything. The irony was complete. The man who'd hidden behind wealth and status rotted in a cage while those he'd dismissed as beneath him were celebrated as heroes. Justice in its purest form. 10 years passed. Beck grew from a traumatized 7-year-old into a confident 17-year-old preparing for college. The nightmares were long gone, replaced by dreams of becoming a social worker like Luna, or maybe a therapist like Dr. Winters who'd helped him heal. He'd grown up surrounded by Hell's Angels. They'd been at his birthday parties, his school events, his football games. Uncle Flint had taught him to ride motorcycles, to fish, to be brave and kind and strong. Uncle Reaper had helped with math homework. Aunt Luna had counseled him through teenage struggles. Aunt Vera had fed him countless meals at the roadhouse. His family didn't look like other kids' families, but it was real and loving and exactly what he needed. Phoenix Rising Foundation had grown beyond anything Marlowe had imagined. In 10 years, they'd helped over 1,500 families, opened satellite offices in 3 other cities, partnered with law enforcement agencies across the Southwest to combat trafficking and domestic violence. Marlowe had become a nationally recognized advocate. She testified before Congress, appeared on national news programs, written a book about her experience that became a bestseller with all proceeds going to the foundation. But she'd never forgotten where she came from. Never forgotten the desperate mother who'd walked into Vera's roadhouse with nothing but hope and fear. On a warm May afternoon, Marlo sat in her foundation office, now much larger than the original space. Photos covered one wall. Families they'd helped. Survivors who'd rebuilt their lives. Children who'd been rescued and given second chances. Beck worked at a desk in the corner, volunteering during his after-school hours. At 17, he'd taken on significant responsibility, helping coordinate rescues, counseling younger kids who'd been through trauma, using his own experience to give hope to others. Flint knocked on the door, stepped in. Got another family that needs help. Single dad trying to protect his daughter from her mother's trafficking operation. He's military, doesn't trust the system. Marlo stood immediately. Let's bring them in. Some things never changed. A person in crisis, a need for help. Phoenix Rising's response immediate and unwavering. That evening, after the new family was settled in safe housing, with security protocols established, Marlo stood on her porch watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in familiar shades of gold and amber. Beck joined her, now taller than she was nearly a man. Mom, I've been thinking about my college essay, about what to write. What did you decide? I want to write about what happened, about you, about how you taught me that real strength isn't about being the biggest or the toughest. It's about being brave when you're terrified, about asking for help when you need it, about judging people by their actions instead of their appearance. Marlo felt tears prick her eyes. Your father would be so proud of you. Both your fathers. She meant Daniel the firefighter who'd died a hero, and Flint who'd become the father figure Beck needed without ever trying to replace the one he'd lost. I know, Beck said simply, because I learned from all of you what it means to be a good man. The memorial ride had become an annual tradition. Every April 15th, Hell's Angels from across the Southwest West converged on Phoenix. The numbers varied, but never dropped below 2,000. A reminder, a celebration, a statement that some things mattered enough to show up for year after year. The route remained the same. Vera's Roadhouse to Cave Creek to Tempe to the capital. A journey that retraced Marlo's nightmare and transformation. A journey that honored not just one rescue, but a philosophy, a way of life. This year, Beck rode his own motorcycle, a gift from Flint for his 17th birthday. He wore his leather vest with pride, the junior patch replaced with a full member honorary designation, the youngest Hell's Angel in Arizona history. Marlo rode beside him, watching her son command the powerful machine with confidence and respect, seeing in him everything good that had come from their darkest moment. The ride ended at the Capitol as always, but this year Marlo had been asked to speak, not as a victim, but as a survivor who had turned tragedy into purpose. She stood before thousands, the Arizona sun warm on her shoulders, her leather vest, a second skin, now after 10 years. 10 years ago today, I walked into Vera's Roadhouse. I was the most desperate and terrified I'd ever been. My son had been kidnapped by a man I'd trusted, a man the world told me was respectable and successful and good. And I was asking for help from people the world told me were dangerous criminals. She paused, looking out at the sea of leather and chrome. I learned something that day that changed my life forever. I learned that those we're taught to fear are sometimes exactly the people we need. That respectability can be a mask for evil. That true character reveals itself not in appearance or wealth or social standing, but in action, in showing up when it matters, in standing up for what's right even when it's difficult. Her voice grew stronger. We live in a world that makes judgments based on surfaces, on clothing and jobs and neighborhoods. A world that teaches us to trust polish over substance. But I'm here to tell you there's another thing. Judge people by what they do when someone needs help, by how they treat the vulnerable, by whether they stand up or look away. She gestured to the Hell's Angels assembled before her. These people saved my son. They've helped 1,500 families through Phoenix Rising Foundation. They show up at children's hospitals and veterans' homes. They organize charity drives and protect those who can't protect themselves. Not for recognition or reward, because it's who they are. Marlo's eyes found Beck in the crowd, her son, her reason for everything. So I want to leave you with this. The next time you encounter someone who looks different, who makes you uncomfortable, who doesn't fit your idea of what a hero looks like, pause. Watch what they do. Judge them by their actions, not their appearance. Because sometimes the people we're taught to fear are exactly the people we need when our world falls apart. The crowd erupted, not just Hell's Angels, but the thousands of citizens who'd come to watch, to support, to celebrate a message that resonated across divides. Marlo stepped down from the stage into Flint's embrace. This man who'd promised to get her son back and had kept that promise, who'd become family in the truest sense. "Proud of you," Flint said simply. "Couldn't have done any of it without you. We're even then because you reminded me why this matters, why we keep showing up, why we keep fighting." As the sun set over Phoenix, thousands of motorcycles began their dispersal, heading back to lives in 4 states, to aunts and families, and ordinary struggles, but connected by something extraordinary, by a commitment to stand up when others looked away, to judge by character rather than appearance, to be the kind of people who answered desperate pleas for help at 3 in the morning, or 3 in the afternoon, or any time at all. Marlo stood with Beck and Flint watching them go, her family, her brothers and sisters in leather. The people who'd shown her that honor lived in unexpected places. That heroism wasn't about capes or superpowers, but about ordinary people doing extraordinary things because it was right. Sterling Caldwell died in prison that year, alone, unmourned, forgotten by everyone except his victims, who remembered him only as a cautionary tale, a reminder that facades eventually crumble, that wealth and status can't hide a rotten core forever. But Beck Tennyson thrived, started college majoring in social work, continued volunteering with Phoenix Rising, grew into a young man who embodied everything good that could come from surviving trauma, who used his experience to help others, who understood that being strong meant being compassionate. And Marlo, once a terrified nurse with nowhere to turn, became a force for change, a voice for victims, a bridge between worlds that society kept separate, a living example that transformation was possible, that good could emerge from evil, that hope survived even the darkest nights. She still wore her leather vest, still rode with the Hell's Angels, still answered calls from desperate people who needed help and had nowhere else to turn. Because some lessons once learned became part of who you were. And the lesson Marlo had learned in that roadhouse 10 years ago was simple but profound. Character isn't about appearance. It's about action. And when you need help, don't be afraid to ask for it from unexpected sources. On a quiet evening in late spring, Marlo stood in the Phoenix Rising Foundation office one last time before heading home. The photos on the wall told stories of redemption and resilience, of families saved and lives rebuilt, of darkness overcome by ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Beck appeared in the doorway, keys to his motorcycle in hand. "Ready to head out, Mom?" Marlo smiled, pulling on her leather vest. "Always ready." They walked out together into the fading Arizona light. Mother and son, survivor and advocate, two people who'd walked through hell and come out the other side stronger, wiser, more determined to make the world a little bit better. Behind them, the foundation's sign caught the last rays of sunlight. Phoenix Rising. From the ashes of tragedy, hope had taken flight. And in the distance, the rumble of a familiar motorcycle engine announced Flint's arrival. Always there, always reliable, always family. Marlo climbed onto her bike, Beck beside her on his own. Flint pulled up, completed the trio. Together they rode into the Arizona sunset. 3 riders among thousands across the country, all connected by patches of leather and bonds of honor. All proof that the world's assumptions about heroism were often exactly wrong. Sometimes heroes wear business suits. Sometimes they wear hospital scrubs. And sometimes they wear leather vests and ride Harleys. The important thing wasn't what they wore. It was what they did when someone needed help. It was showing up when it mattered. It was standing up when others looked away. That was the lesson Marlo Tennyson had learned. That was the truth she'd spent 10 years sharing. That was the legacy she'd built from her darkest moment. And as the 3 motorcycles disappeared into the desert evening, their engines creating a harmony that spoke of family and purpose and unbreakable bonds, one thing was certain. The story that had begun with a desperate mother walking into a biker bar had become something far greater. A movement, a message, a reminder that honor lives in unexpected places, and that sometimes asking for help from those you've been taught to fear is the bravest thing you can do.